Welcome to the Investigation Homicide podcast, coming to you live from the Line Shot Photography Podcast Studios in Madison, Mississippi. Tim Dillard at Line Shot Photography is Central Mississippi's premier dramatic sports portrait photographer. Teams, individuals, seniors, full media days. Any sport, any age. Book now at lineshotphotography.com or email tim at lineshotphotography.com.
Some people in this world are on the front lines of the struggle between good and evil, and some, like us, bear witness. I'm Therese Apel.
And I'm Nicole Crowell. You may have heard us as we worked on stories and series about law enforcement and crime. And it's safe to say we've seen some of the best and worst of human nature.
We decided there's no greater honor than bringing you the stories of the men and women who seek out the monsters, who speak for the victims, and who put the pieces together on some of the biggest Mississippi crime stories of our time.
Welcome to Investigation Homicide.
There you are.
Hello, everybody. How are you guys? We have a very special guest here today. He's chiming in. He's in a Zoom. Happy Thursday, everybody. I know you guys haven't seen me in a long time. I've been kind of MIA. And Therese is MIA. She is down on the coast doing some fun stuff for what we're about to talk about today, which is Hurricane Katrina. It's about to be the 20-year anniversary. Today is the day before. Everybody knows that feeling. And today I am joined by Amanda. How are you, Amanda?
I'm good. I'm excited that Therese trusted us to be completely unsupervised. Again, we didn't mess up too bad last time, I guess.
I think we did a great job last time. It was Christian Vance was on last time, and we got along. And this time we have to do a Zoom. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah. So Therese connected us with one of the best people that we could talk to about Hurricane Katrina. Today we have Mr. Robert Latham, who is retired now, but he was the former director of MEMA. And he has some special insights that maybe not everybody was privy to while we were going through it. So for those of you that know, I'm from Ocean Springs. I was just a little girl when Hurricane Katrina hit. I was 12 years old and I was in 7th grade. So I remember just enough to know that it was really scary and also be young enough to kind of like not understand the full impact of it. And I know over these 20 years, there's been a lot of questions. There's a new documentary out now about Hurricane Katrina. There's little bit of misinformation. There's a whole lot of stories, and we're going to go over all the little details today. And for a second, I just want to introduce Mr. Robert. Thank you for joining us today, Robert. How are you?
Fine. Thank you, Nicole, for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Therese has said so many wonderful things about you, so I'm just really excited to get to talk to you today.
Don't believe everything.
Oh, well, it's all good. It's all good, as always.
Good.
So being the director of MEMA, that must be a pretty serious job. How does one kind of become a director of MEMA? Were you a first responder at any point, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, Nicole, it's kind of interesting how I got there. I mean, I was actually in the National Guard. I worked full time at the unit in Senatobia. And so I was right on the verge of retiring from the Guard in 1994. And we had the ice storm of 94. I'm sure you probably don't remember that. But it pretty much just, the ice was several inches thick in North Mississippi. It shut down communications, shut down power, shut down just about everything. And I was a fire chief at the same time in Senatobia. So the county had appointed me as emergency management director for the county 3 weeks before the ice storm of 94. And so I'm sitting at the house and, things just starting to get a little hairy, and so started losing power in the county and stuff. And I said, well, I guess I probably ought to get this plan out and review it and see just what I'm supposed to do. And so that's how I got into emergency management. But when I retired in 1995 from the Guard, the county appointed me as the county emergency management director. And I did that full time for 5 years. And in 2000, Governor Musgrove, who became governor at the time, I had known him. He'd been my state senator. And I had known him for a long time. And he asked me to come to Jackson and be the head of MEMA. So that's how I got there. I guess it's interesting because I can tell you that after coming down there, I came in January of 2000. My wife followed me in March when she was able to sell the house, pack up the house, do everything, and move all by herself while I was down there. And I was on the way back to the motel one day before she came down, and I'd been there 2 or 3 weeks, and I just told her, I said, I think we've made a horrible mistake. It was coming from a small town. I'd been the fire chief of a volunteer fire department, but then I had this agency, with 40 something people, with a relatively small budget, and had all these responsibilities. And so that's how I got into it. I guess, I just kind of stumbled into it, but, I believe that, I believe God put me in the right place at the right time for that. And, it's made me a better person. And, I hope that we did the citizens of Mississippi proud, trying to lead them through a tough time with Governor Barber.
Absolutely. And, we're going to talk about Hurricane Katrina today and the impact of that, and with, how you manage it as a whole crisis, and then also what happened behind the scenes. But isn't it crazy that it's the 20-year anniversary?
Well, I mean, what's really crazy is you tell me you were 12 years old, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is it been that long? But I mean, what's interesting is that I talk to people all the time, and I just assume that they were around at the time, and then I have to pinch myself and realize that's 20 years ago. There are people that wasn't even born then. So yes, it's kind of sobering, but I just believe that I was there at the right time for the right reason, and while it was probably the state's worst time, I got to see Mississippians at their best, and that was one of the most rewarding parts of the whole event.
Yeah, it was really crazy to see how everybody kind of was brought together through that disaster. Yeah. So let's kind of start before the storm even hit, because what was interesting about Katrina was, as far as I know, the last big storm that had hit was Camille.
Oh, yeah. My dad actually lived on the coast in like Moss Point, and I remember him talking about he lived through Camille.
Yeah.
And now he's lived through Katrina.
Yeah. Two big major disasters, but they were pretty far apart in terms of years.
Yeah.
So I remember that right leading up to it, to just the general public, it wasn't that big of a deal. If you live down there, normally it was kind of come on as like it was going to be a Cat 2, became a Cat 3. We still go to the grocery stores during a Cat 3, we're going to buy bread. We're going to go do whatever.
It's probably like if you live in the north and it snows and like it's just that's a regular day, but here in Mississippi we shut down if it snows.
If it snows, game over.
Yeah.
Hurricanes, tropical storms, whatever, same thing.
Yeah.
But it was right before it hit landfall that it became a Category 5. So what does it like? Take me through those last kind of couple days. Where were you? How were you watching this hurricane develop? And how were you kind of getting prepared for what you thought was going to happen?
Well, Nicole, I can probably go back just a little bit because, prior to Katrina, I had several disasters at the state level with Governor Musgrove, and then 1 or 2 with Governor Barber. Had a small hurricane help us from FEMA in July of that year. Just happened to be the same people that came back in August for Katrina. So we had already established a relationship with them. So that helped tremendously. Bill Carwile, who was the FEMA FCO, Federal Coordinating Officer, led that team. And he had a good bit of his team from the West Coast, actually the San Francisco area, Region 9, because pretty much the rest of the FCOs were tied up in other disasters. So he was actually originally sent to Louisiana, but they basically redirected him to Mississippi, and I'm thankful for that. So they arrived on, even though we talked multiple times before he arrived on Saturday before landfall on Monday morning, we had been talking, and back on Tuesday, I believe it was, of August the 23rd, and I can't explain this. I don't really know. I mean, it was highly unusual to do a situation report at MEMA for something that had not happened. I mean, typically something happens, we do a situation report, we release it to the public, we release it to all our local partners, federal partners, and they can see what's going on and what we're doing. So nothing has happened, but it's interesting. You can go back, and we actually published our first situation report on August the 23rd, a full 6 days before Katrina. But it was something about that storm when it came off the African coast into the Atlantic. It was just something about it that was unsettling. You know, maybe it was just that, you know, we're overdue. I don't know. But we knew it had been decades since Camille. So we produced that situation report, and it ramped up quickly on about Wednesday of that week. We started producing more situation reports, and then by Friday we were actually activating. The governor signed a state of emergency. We were activating some National Guard units to send to the coast, and on Saturday before landfall, I made a trip to the coast, which I was basically advised by many people not to do. But I had made a commitment to the local EMA directors because I had been a local EMA director, and I know how important it is to have a connection with the state. So I had committed to them that when I became MEMA director, I would come visit the coast before every hurricane to make sure things were in place, make sure they had what they needed, make sure we were on the same sheet of music. What was the timeline for evacuations? All these things which the state needs to know. So I came along the coast from Jackson County to Harrison County and finished up in Hancock County. And you mentioned about, it wasn't a big deal for a lot of citizens. And I have to tell you this story because I think it kind of reinforces what you said. We know that on the coast, citizens get hurricane fatigue.
Yes, I think that's a good way to say it.
You go through that so many times, and you just say, you know what, this is not going to be it. I'm not going to stay. I was here through Camille. I survived. I'm going to be fine. It can't be that bad. So, I came along in Harrison County on Highway 90. I will never forget it. On the beach, people were out like it was July the 4th. This was on Saturday, and we knew it was going to be landfall overnight, Sunday night and Monday morning. And we had already, the locals had already issued voluntary evacuations, and people weren't leaving. The traffic count from MDOT was low on I-59 and I-55 and 49, so people weren't leaving. And of all things, in the middle of all that circus environment was Jim Cantori.
Yes.
He was broadcasting, on the beach, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So I left the coast and got back late Saturday night, and I just told the governor, I said, people are not evacuating. They're not taking this seriously. It really concerned me. And I said some other things and did some other interviews, and we might want to talk about that a little bit later. But I did do some other interviews that ultimately I think might have changed the perception on the coast of what was fixing to happen a little bit. But, having said that, I will say that I still cannot forget and get off my mind the fact that 238 Mississippians lost their life during Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, it was really crazy to see because, just from my point of view, right? I'm 12 years old. Hurricane's going to hit. We're evacuating. Okay, great. No big deal. Yeah. We even left. It was to the point where we just kind of left our dog at our house. He was out in the back. He had a nice dog house. Nothing had ever happened before. We went over to the next state and we're watching. I remember sitting in the hotel and watching the TV. And all of a sudden, I remember sitting there and being like, this is not okay. Something is happening. Something terrible is happening. And I'm, of course, I'm thinking about my dog and my friend, and my best friend's mom had stayed with their dogs, and all these people that stayed, and the thought, not knowing what was happening was really confusing for a kid. And then also knowing that bad things were happening, but nobody knew at that time, nobody had come back yet.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of watching it on the news. There's all this, the water level is to an incredible level that nobody would ever imagine, to the very tippy tops of the tallest buildings that we have there. And you see people on roofs, and, I can't imagine being an adult and having to take care of my entire family, and then let alone being a first responder who has to be the first response to come back to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to mention that because that was one thing we had never really experienced or planned for, right or wrong. And that was, that we always kind of expected our first responders to be available in there. We never considered the fact that they were going to be impacted too, so
they lost their houses and their clothes.
They did. And they left their families to do what they had to do. And, it was just something to see that. And they did the job they were called to do. And, and we can talk about it later too, but what happened from the state of Florida and the resources that came over from the Panhandle, and eventually those resources that came from every state in the nation to help us in that period of time was just unbelievable.
So so hurricane hits, it's bad. What is the first step that MEMA takes to make sure that we're going to get through this?
So a lot of that when we know there's an event coming gives us something that is very valuable, and that's time. So days before, once the governor signs the state of emergency, we can deploy resources and assets. We can do things. We can expedite purchases under the emergency purchases procedure. So there were a lot of things that we did. We deployed resources and personnel. We activated the Guard, and we had National Guardsmen at the 3 coastal counties. And their job was to be an asset for the local emergency managers that needed to do search and rescue in the immediate landfall or pre-landfall as the storm surge came in. So they would have assets that they didn't have to call and ask for. These were assets that they could use in addition to what they already had organic within the city or the county. So we did that. We had pre-positioned some supplies. FEMA had called me, and they were, when they were en route, I believe it was on Thursday, they had already ordered a lot of resources, including reefer trailers. That's the refrigerated trailers. And that's something you might want to talk about later too. But they had ordered, rations, water, all kind of stuff, tarps, you name it. Everything had been requested before they ever got here. So we were prepared, and we had done conference calls with our locals, and we felt like everything was in place. The one thing that was not considered, and if I don't know if you remember this or not, but when Katrina made landfall, there was no such thing as a storm surge prediction. They didn't have the data. They didn't have the science. They didn't have the history of hurricanes and to have ability to forecast with a hurricane of such size and such wind speed and with the environment, the temperature and everything, they could project what the storm surge would be. Now, had we had that, it would have made a big difference, but we didn't have that. And as you said, it was, there's some places in Hancock County where we believe that the water got to 35 feet. If you look on I-10, I believe that's Highway 603 that goes under I-10, and it's well inland several miles. There's a concrete marker at the top of that overpass, and that was put in several years after Katrina, and there's a line on it that marks the water line of where the water was during Katrina. Now, they eventually took all it said Hurricane Katrina water line. They took all that off because the economic development people said, this is killing our economic development. Nobody wants to come here knowing that water could get that high inland. So they took all the references to what that was off. And as far as I know, the marker is still there. Just nobody really knows what it is. But that was the water line on the I-10 overpass over 603. So, there was a lot of things that we had done. And unfortunately, the Hancock County EOC, which was south of Highway 90, was flooded. And you wondered, you were asking what was the first thing that FEMA did? Well, obviously deploy resources, check in with the locals, make sure they have everything they need. And then what's sad was overnight, it was obvious that the storm surge was going to be bad, but the EOC, they stayed at the EOC, and there was probably some 40 people in there. And overnight, as it started to make landfall into the early morning hours of Monday, August the 29th, we lost all communication with the Gulf Coast. We could not communicate with anybody. So they want to know what that was like. I said, well, it was kind of like, you hear the people talk about the space shuttle or spaceship that goes in and comes back in the reentry. There's a blackout period where it comes to the reentry into to the atmosphere. So there's no communication. I said, that's what it was like, except it lasted hours. And I can remember that the first communications I got some kind of way, and I don't remember, first of all, Jim Butch, who you passed away a few years ago, was the meteorologist from the National Weather Service that was at the EOC with us. He came into my office late Sunday night and said, Robert, we just got a measurement from a buoy in the Gulf, and it measured wave heights of 50 feet. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, well, I said, well, what's it measured now? She said, we don't know. It destroyed the buoy. It's not reading anymore. So that was the first sign that this was going to be bad. And then the next message I got was that water had gotten into the EOC. There were some 40 people in there, and the EOC had flooded. So, I don't know, are they still alive? I don't know. There were a lot of people there, but I don't know who. And then I got a message that said that the water level in Biloxi was up 2/3 of the way on the marquee at the Hard Rock Cafe.
Which is insane.
At the Beau Rivage. I'm sorry, the Beau Rivage.
Yes.
And that's insane. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So,
I remember my number one memory is my dad used to work at the Grand Casino.
Yeah.
And the casino, all the casinos have to be on the water. So they're on the water part. The whole building was lifted up, moved across the highway, and laid back down on the other side of the highway. And I remember when we drove back, I think we came back maybe, it was a while because our food smelled terrible.
Yeah.
That's another memory. And, but it was just the rubble. They had cleared the rubble off the side of the road. And there was, when I say a mountain of rubble, it was like as tall as a building on both sides. And you don't just see, it's not logs, it's not limbs, it's not just random stuff. It's clothes, photographs, it's books, it's posters, it's everything that everybody ever owned. Some people lost literally everything they have ever owned except for the clothes that they packed.
Yeah.
In their suitcase.
It's it. You talk about the Grand Casino and all the laws that when the casinos were allowed, they had to build them on the water. And I remember when I first became MEMA director, I did a tour of the coast, and I was trying to find out about the casinos and what the plan was. And I know this may sound crazy, but this is exactly what happened. So I'm thinking, so why? I mean, you have maybe the hotel, if there was one, and other administrative offices and stuff that could be on land. The gambling part had to be on the water. And I said, well, so what's the purpose of that? I said, well, if you look, and even up in the Mississippi Delta on the river, they're all put on barges. And they went to show me, if you notice, as the tide comes in and out, it shifts up and down. And the whole plan is that if it gets to be a bad hurricane, they can just hook to these barges and tow them up the Mississippi River. And I'm thinking, it's crazy, but that's what I was told that the purpose was. And well, I can tell you one thing, like you said, they all floated. I mean, and the Grand floated across Highway 90 in the parking lot. Yeah.
So this storm was interesting because it definitely impacted the coast, but it impacted the whole state as well. There were power outages even here in central Mississippi.
Yeah.
Amanda.
Yeah.
Where were you? What do you remember?
So I was 17 and I lived with my parents in Clinton.
Okay.
And I remember, I guess so landfall was like in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So I remember losing power before landfall. So central Mississippi, we lost power before the hurricane even kind of got like really hit.
Yeah.
And I was mad.
Yeah.
I was 17. Like, what?
Yeah.
And I slept through the storm. Of course, that is still true today. I'm a hard sleeper. But we got some rain. But it wasn't as real to me as it was for people who were like in the thick of it, experiencing it. It wasn't until the days later, like I distinctly remember my middle sister getting in line to go and get gas, and in her true fashion, she ran out of gas in the line to get gas, and I'm pretty sure one of the Clinton cops had to, like, give her a couple of dollars to get
Sweet
gas.
baby.
Like, I don't even think that she had money to get gas. Like, what are you doing? But, yeah, I think that's really how Central Mississippi was impacted. It was through the chaos of no power and the shortages on gas and, like, everything being closed because no one could get anything. No one was delivering groceries to the stores and obviously gas to the gas station, and it was interesting. We were out of power for at least a week.
That's a long time.
Yeah, for us to be,
Yeah.
100 miles from the coast or over 100 miles from the coast and, to not have power.
Do you think that
Amanda, you mentioned I was going to just say, you mentioned that it hit before it made landfall. And what a lot of people don't realize is Katrina was so large that we started getting hurricane force winds well before it made landfall. I mean, it was affecting the coast early. And then the actual eye of the hurricane came through Jackson later on the day and Monday, and 75-mile-an-hour winds. So it was still a Category 1 hurricane when it came through Jackson, and went on out and went up through the northeast part of the state, and pretty much every county in the state was affected. And that was one of the problems that we had with being able to get commodities and resources, is because where you normally get your stuff from or places that are closer to where you are, but everywhere in Mississippi had been affected. And then you had Louisiana. So all the resources that were in the federal system were being split, to accommodate Louisiana as well as Mississippi. So I think it was we were getting 17% of all the commodities, the water, the food, and all that stuff that we were requesting every day. We requested it, and we were getting 17%, and it was like day 10. So it was on up into September, around the 9th or something like that, before we finally got to where the burn rate of the commodities was being resupplied by the resupply rate. So, it balanced out at that point, but it was 10 days.
That's a crazy amount of time. I never knew that it was that long up here.
Well, so we have a comment that says, in Madison, the lights only blinked twice and they stayed on. That's true Madison fashion. But again, he lost his job because a lot of his accounts were on the coast. So people were not just affected physically by the storm, whether they lost, their houses or material things. People's livelihoods were affected. I mean, I can only imagine the people on the coast who worked in the casinos and all of those surrounding areas. Like, what do you do? Even if you do relocate, like, what do you do?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because we hired a lot of the casino employees that were out of a job. Say FEMA hired them. They have a lot of people that they hire locally, and they always do try to hire as many local people as possible because it helps with the economy. It helps with people that have lost their jobs because of whatever disaster it was. So we had a lot of people that were employed helping us as well as FEMA. And so that helped some. But I think the thing was challenging was housing, temporary housing, and finding people to stay, even if they did have a job down there, where were they going to stay? So that became a tremendous challenge for all of us.
Yeah, I think I remember a few places put up some cots.
Yeah.
And had people staying on cots. And I think it was maybe right after we had maybe been in the wherever we evacuated to, and they were setting up even over there, because it was everybody just had to go out, because you really don't have anywhere. Like, you have to go where somebody.
Yeah.
Ended up moving to Vegas, which is where the people we knew were, which was crazy town. But what the thing that I kind of always go back to is you hear those first responder stories of, and I'm going to be vulgar here, there's one that always sticks out in my brain of a father of a friend who had to take a baby out of a tree. And I think that people, because we were all we had that hurricane fatigue.
Yeah.
Those lives, we viewed it differently after that.
Yeah.
And after seeing that, so with the first responders, are you guys managing the local first responders as well and sanctioning them out to their duties? Or was it more like all hands on deck, everybody do what you can?
Well, there's a lot of people that self-deploy. There are a lot of volunteers and stuff, and trying to manage that is the challenge, because you don't want to turn down help, but at the same time, you don't want it to be. And for us in Mississippi, Katrina, I mean, we had all these people coming in. Well, they could probably help, but where are we going to house them? Where are we going to feed them? Where are we going to make sure they get medical care? And then make sure that we can use them where they can best be used. So that was a challenge for all of us. So we were trying, and it's really interesting because Bill Carwile, the FCO, came to me right after Katrina. He said, "Rob, we're going to have to manage this different from any disaster we've ever had. We're going to try to use something we tried to use in Florida in 2004. We just couldn't get it going, but it was basically a unified command system under the ICS, Instant Command System structure." And it said normally that structure is set up based on functions, whether it's transportation, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he said, he said, this is so big, we're not going to be able to manage it that way. So let's set it up geographically. So you had zones that were set up, and then within that you had sections, et cetera. So we divided the state, the whole state, with the only 3 counties in the first area, because it was the hardest hit. And so we managed it that way, and we put MEMA staff as well as FEMA staff with the locals, and we would send resources to that area, and it was up to the locals and their joint partners to manage the resources within their area. And then if they had more than needed, they could move it to another area via the team that was set in place. So that was something that actually came out of Katrina that had never been done, and actually became where it was actually taught in the schoolhouses of emergency services of how you manage a disaster geographically as opposed to functions. So that came out of it very well. But you mentioned the sad thing about the child, and I want to say this because it was probably the one thing during Katrina that affected me the most. On Wednesday, Bill Carwile and I flew down on Tuesday in a Black Hawk to Harrison County. We were there Tuesday night. We got up Wednesday morning, drove over to Hancock County because communication was still out. So we were actually trying to get answers to questions and statuses by writing the questions on a notepad, putting somebody in a car and telling them to drive over to such and such a county, go to the EOC, get answers to these questions, and bring them back to us.
Wow.
That's how we were communicating and getting information on what they needed and what the status was. So we hadn't gotten much out of Hancock County, but I knew that, as I said, that the water had flooded the EOC. And I found out when I got over there that, basically the water, got up to the ceiling there, and most everybody in there was just holding on to something to keep from drowning. And basically they had written their name and social security number with a magic marker on their arms, because they did not think they were going to survive. And, it was just shocking to me. But when I arrived there, that was one of the things I found out. But then Congressman Gene Taylor at the time, who represented the coast, was there, and his home had been destroyed as well. And he met me at the EOC door, and he said, "Robert," he said, "I got somebody I need for you to talk to." So he took me to a bus that I believe Delta State had actually sent it down for the county to work out of. Mm. And he said, "I need for you to meet somebody in here that we've got a problem." And he took me in, and it was actually the funeral home director for there in Hancock County. And he said, and he was really upset. He said, my morgue is full. I don't have anywhere else to put the deceased. So we're fixing to have to start putting it in the parking lot and covering them up with tarps. And I said, "I don't know what we're going to do, but we're not going to do that. I mean, that's not what we're going to do." And again, only by the grace of God, I think that a gentleman drove up in a reefer trailer, which is a trailer that has a refrigerator unit in it, so he can haul ice and food and stuff like that. He had dropped a load of ice at Stennis Space Center. So that was just in Hancock County. So he had dropped by there to get directions for something. He was going to get another load of ice. And just so happened, Bill Carwile and I talked to him, and I asked him, what was he going to do? He said, "This is my truck." He said, I'm under contract with FEMA to go get some more ice. I said, "Well, can we rent your truck from you?" He said, well, that's just the way I make my living. So I'm not sure that I can do that. What do you, and I told him what I needed it for. I told him, I said, we need a temporary morgue. He said, I can't do that. He said, this is the way I make my living. And once you do that with my trailer, I won't ever be able to use it again. And we talked with him a few minutes, and he agreed to sell us that trailer.
Wow.
We agreed on $25,000. And keep in mind now, when I came to MEMA, I was really, really green when it comes to big government. Okay, so at the local level, I can manage things pretty well, but this was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. So, $25,000. Now I'm thinking, God, that was just pennies. But I told him, I said, I don't know how we're gonna pay for this, but he said, but the Chancery Clerk, Tim Keller, wrote a check for $25,000. Bill Carwile and I basically signed a promissory note that we would reimburse the county for that $25,000 some kind of way. And long story short, they did get reimbursed for it. And when you look at the billions that we wound up spending, the $25,000 was nothing. But at the time, that was the most important thing that we could have done. For me personally, and certainly for Hancock County and those in Hancock County who lost loved ones, that was the most important thing on my plate at the time. And I just knew we had to do something. And that's what we did.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Like, there was already so much devastation, and just if I cannot imagine just seeing a pile of bodies.
Yeah.
I don't think I would be able to come back from that.
I mean, that's like going overseas and going to war.
Yeah.
But you're in your hometown.
Yeah, and I imagine like people who lost people and you don't know where they are, or you have a parent or a child down there and you lost contact with them and they don't have a cell phone or whatever. Maybe they were displaced, and you have to go sift through them.
Yes. I mean, it was just, I think it was so surreal for me to experience that particular instance. And there were several more. I mean, there's just lots of stories that have not been told, but that one in particular had really a tremendous impact on me personally. And I just, think about it every day. And I think about the people on the coast. And like you said, from the beach all the way to the elevated railroad track, there was nothing but slabs. And when you got past the railroad track, there might have been some damage, but most of the houses were still intact. Maybe some roofs were off or something like that. But that water took out everything south of the railroad tracks. And, I'd go down there just so much. And I stayed down there a whole week before we came back to the EOC because Governor Barber wanted us back in Jackson. And I just, I kept looking at it and I'm thinking, how do you rebuild from something like this? And I think about all the people who had retired down there, the families that had passed their homes through generations, and all of a sudden it's all gone, and I'm thinking, you get your house rebuilt, and then for the next decade or so, you look out on your front porch and all you see is destruction. I mean, how do you do that? I don't know, but I think that taught me a lot about the resilience of the coast. It taught me a lot about the people of the coast, because it would have been real easy for somebody like me just to pack up and say, that's it, I'm done.
I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah, I am too. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I can tell you that I would not have wanted to be in any other place during that time, because like I said, it affected me personally. It changed how I think about things and how I look at life. And and being able to see what the coast is now, I just never would have dreamed it would be what it is now.
I can't either, because when I moved down when I moved to Ocean Springs, there wasn't even a Walmart there.
Yeah,
it was just like my school and a Rite Aid and a gas station.
Yeah.
Now I go down and it is
Waffle Houses as far as the eye can see.
So many Waffle Houses. We're getting more restaurants, but it's built up so much, and I don't think I expected it to do that. I kind of thought that it would be forgotten.
Yeah. I think that what Governor Barber did with the Surrett and putting the private sector in, and all of these experts and smart people on community development and how to build cities and communities. And, I used to talk about it all the time. This was one of the few disasters where every aspect of your life is destroyed. I mean, your local government and all the buildings that you realize the schools, the city halls, the services where you go to church, where you get your health care, all of those things are gone. I mean, so every aspect, I mean, the only thing left really were the people. And I think what is on the Mississippi Gulf Coast right now is a testament to the resilience and strength of the people of the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
That's right. Props to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you had mentioned there's clearly a lot of stories that we are never going to have enough time to go over them. But what is something that emergency management, emergency operations did or does that maybe we might not really appreciate enough?
I think that one of the challenges now, I mean, after Katrina and even, for years, even probably a decade after Katrina, I think that the relationship that I had built with all the locals and the fact that when I came to MEMA, only 42 counties of the 82 had emergency management directors. So only about half of them.
Okay.
The others didn't. So for 4 years, my first 4 years as MEMA director, I worked real hard to get an emergency management director on the payroll in every county. And at the end of 4 years, we had achieved that. So I think after that, people finally realized how important that person is, because prior to that, you had these other 40 counties that basically, because by law, it said they had to have an emergency management director, they might appoint the chancery clerk or the sheriff or who knows who. Right. But they don't know emergency management. They don't know what they need to do. It kind of like I was when I was appointed the county director and had the ice storm. They didn't know what they were doing. So, we felt it was important to get somebody that could communicate with the state on a daily basis. And I spent a lot of time. I visited every county multiple times in the 10 plus years I was a MEMA director, because for me, the most important part was that relationship with them and the elected officials. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, I think one of the benefits of that was after Katrina, you didn't have those local officials trying to throw me under the bus. And, they didn't want to point fingers and blame anybody, because they knew we were all in this together and they knew we were doing everything we could. It was just that I think, and I've said this many times, is that, there are some disasters that are bigger than any plan. And I think Katrina was one of them. And I think one of the things that we've learned, you mentioned and asked me, what do you think emergency management has learned from all that? And I think that we learned that there's just some disasters that you better be quick on your feet and find solutions to, because you can't. We used to actually exercise our plans to succeed because we didn't want to admit we had a bad plan. So I can tell you that after Katrina hit, I didn't look at the state plan. I mean, we were making decisions based on the information that we had.
Yeah.
What was the critical need and what the priorities were. And we had established goals and things for every area, and everything we did was funneled toward trying to meet those goals. So I didn't look at the plan. Granted, after Katrina, the plan was revised. One of the things in the plan said that for reefer trailers, the port is in Gulfport, so there's hundreds of reefer trailers at the port on a daily basis that hauls bananas, pineapples. So the plan was to use some of the reefer trailers at the port for temporary boards. Well, you know what? They were all piled up north of Highway 90, right there beside the Grand Casino, from the storm. There weren't any, we couldn't get any. Yeah. So, and FEMA had ordered 8 before they got there, but they had not arrived by the time that I made that visit to the Hancock County EOC and bought that one trailer. So, I think that hopefully if we learned anything is that, you just have to make a decision. You can't just let the bureaucracy of government keep you from doing what needs to be done. You just, you do what your gut tells you to do and pray that it's the right thing and stand by your decision. Yeah, you'll probably make some mistakes, but in the end, I think people will respect you for making a decision rather than him hawing around and promising something that you can't deliver.
I don't think you could have said it any better than that.
Yeah, that was a mouthful, and that goes well beyond MEMA. That goes
Yes.
for every, government agency, and I think that plans are just a piece of paper that make
Yeah.
the upper administration happy to say, "We have a plan. We can show the people we have a plan," but when
Yeah.
sugar turns,
Mm.
everyone knows that that plan goes out the window,
That's right.
and we're
Yeah.
just winging it.
Yeah, you'll hear military people tell you that, in combat, that your plan goes out the window once the first shot is fired.
Mm.
So then you just kind of start reacting and doing what you have to do. I mean, and that's, the structure is important. You had to have a structure, a command structure, and a management structure, which we had. And I think that was the important part, and then beyond that, everything else is just icing on the cake. I mean, but those relationships is something that you can't replace, especially in a crisis, because then you got a lot of people with you in the foxhole.
I agree. I think Amanda agrees too.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a comment from Miss Tina Davis Jordan. Mr. Robert Latham Jr. was an
Oh
awesome
goodness, Tina.
leader. Yes, Miss Tina. And she also said, I didn't work at MEMA during Katrina, but I did work under Mr. Latham Jr. What a wealth of knowledge he has. And that's not the first time I've heard that.
She's biased.
Oh,
She's biased.
it's funny how everybody that loves you is biased.
Well, she did work for me when I came back to MEMA the second time as one of my area coordinators. And that was one of the things we had put in place because I felt like having a daily connection with the locals was important. And obviously I couldn't do it, so those area coordinators were out there and they were responsible to these counties. And they were also my eyes and ears to see what was going on. And Tina, along with many others, she's a jewel, I tell you. And she got me through a lot of tight binds, but they kept me informed and enabled me to not be surprised by anything. And we were able to stay ahead of things. And yeah, she's a little biased, but okay.
But that's okay. We'll take it.
Yeah, I love her anyway.
We had me and Amanda here today. Tadara's tuned in. I can't see her comment right now, but she said 3 of her favorite people. Speaking of,
she was sending us text messages.
Was she? I didn't get them. Sorry.
I was reading them.
Oh boy. Sorry, Therese. You should have commented it. That's not my fault.
Oh, Therese said that.
Right.
Therese is listening.
She is.
I
think she's listening. She has to make sure that we stay on our best behavior.
They're doing good, Therese.
Thank you. I hope we can maybe have you on for something else while she's here. I think that'd be fun. She said you were one of her favorite bosses ever. There she is. Probably the best boss I ever had. I'm with Tina. Awesome leader.
Sadly, it was just a short period of time, but yeah, she's a jewel too.
She is. We love Therese over here.
Yeah.
So we went over the before, we went over the during, we went over the after. Is there anything that you would like to say that I may not have thought to ask you?
I think you said it well by saying that, we could probably stay on here for hours and I could tell you all kind of stories of behind the scenes. There was times when politics got involved and, really got me frustrated. But I can tell you that it wasn't from Governor Barber. I had, Governor Barber reappointed me, and I had never met Governor Barber before he was elected governor. And I was appointed by a Democratic governor. So to be honest with you, when he was elected, governor, I just felt my time, in public service. I was gone. I was ready to pack my bags and come back to North Mississippi. But, he called me like maybe a week or two before Christmas. In 2003, before he was sworn in January, and he just said, Robert, he said, I don't know much about you, but I would like for you to continue to be my MEMA director. He said, you've got a lot of friends around the state, and I told him, I said, look, I've spent a lot of my time working with local officials, and I don't care whether they were Democrat or Republican or whatever. I never asked. I don't care, because I felt like that my job. The last thing I'm going to do is, try to make decisions based on a political affiliation, what somebody believes. And I just always believe that if someone has lost everything they own, let's just say it's one house a tornado just happens to come through and destroys one house. It doesn't get any worse than that. I don't care if it destroys a town. For that one family, it doesn't get any worse than their home being destroyed. And that's the way I tried to approach everything. I mean, I spend a lot of time with all three of the governors I worked for in the field after disasters, because they needed to see somebody and talk to them. And they, a lot of times I think that they realize that your hands are tied and you can only do certain things. But the fact that you're willing to listen, for a lot of them, is all they want to know, and that you care. And that if you make a promise to them, then you got to follow through with that. I never promised anything I didn't think I could deliver, but I did tell them, that I would be there. And I'm going to close with, I don't know how long we have, but I guess we're getting close. I don't know. I'm going to close with this, because I told you that the thing with the morgue in Hancock County was probably one of the most important things that impacted me. But there was one other story, and I know Therese has heard this story, and y'all may have too, but after I retired in 2006, we had the state EOC that they now have. I was able to get funding for that from the legislation from FEMA, and they were building it while we when we were going through Katrina, it was still being built. So we were still down in the National Guard Army where our office was. So Mike Womack, who had been my deputy, and then Governor Barber appointed him to take my place after I retired, asked me to come back and speak at the opening of the state EOC. So I came back and made some comments, and then they opened up the EOC so that people could go in and see it. And there were a lot of local elected officials, like senators and representatives from Rankin County, since that's where the EOC was. And Mike had asked, he said, Robert, since you kind of designed this building, why don't you just show the local officials around and show them what we got now, and they should be proud of us. So we walked out of the executive office area and then around the hall, and then ran right into a lady that was coming out of one of the glass doors. And I think it was in maybe the personnel side or something of the EOC. And I do not remember her name. I wish I did, because I would like to connect with her and find out how she is today. But she told me, she said, "Are you Robert Latham?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, I'm sorry, I don't know you. If I met you, I'm sorry, I don't remember. She said, "No, you never met me," but said, on Saturday night before Katrina, you did an interview on public radio, and your voice was cracking, and you were really upset because the evacuation wasn't going well, and you obviously were concerned. I said, I really was, because I'd been on the coast and I was not happy with what was going on. She said, "Well, I lived in Pass Christian. I think it was Pass Christian. It could have been Long Beach, but it was on that side of the coast." And she said, we were just a block or two off the coast. And she said, "To be honest with you, I had decided to stay. We were going to ride out the storm. And then after you did that interview, I changed my mind and we evacuated." And I said, "So what happened to your home?" She said, "Well, I didn't get back down there for 3 weeks. But said, when I got back down there, there was nothing left of our home but a slab." And she said, "I don't know what would have happened to us if I had not left." And I always, after being down there on the coast on Saturday, and I always worried, that people were going to stay. And as I've said many times, Camille killed more people during Katrina than Katrina did, because they said, "We survived Camille, it can't be any worse than this." And she said, I think, for some reason we just decided to evacuate. And that to me made me realize, well, maybe I did get through to some people. I regret that 238 people perished. There's no reason for it. There's absolutely no reason for it. And my message is, please don't get hurricane fatigue. I've never had to evacuate, so I can't imagine the stress, the mental stress that you go through, the physical stress, the financial stress of evacuating. But please do not take a chance on hurricanes, because if Katrina caused anything, is that they could be deadly. And, don't be a statistic, be a survivor.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We all learned our lesson, and I can't imagine how many lives were impacted by your broadcast. Even if it was just that lady and her husband and her children, and if she's listening, please reach out. Maybe it'll get her.
I would love to talk to her.
Can reconnect. I think that'd be really sweet. I posted on some Gulf Coast groups, so maybe she's in one of them and she'll see it.
Well, I believe it was Sunday night. We had a press conference at the EOC, and Burt Case came up to me after the press conference, and he said, "Robert, what do you think?" I said, Bert, this is going to be worse than Camille. And he said, no, there's no way. He said, I was on the coast reporting for Camille. There's no way it could be that bad. I said, Bert, this is going to be worse than Camille. And, after all that happened, Bert came back to me. He said, every time I saw Bert after that, he said, you were right. You were right.
That's right.
I wish I hadn't been right. But
I know. Well, 20 years later, and we've had a couple bad ones, but we haven't had a Katrina. And knock on this mic.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it doesn't happen again anytime soon. Amanda, do you have any parting thoughts or questions?
Not really. I think that since Katrina, the entire state has just been stronger, and the word that you keep on using is resilient. And so even as more disasters come about, they all like band together. So Katrina was a horrible disaster, but some good came from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got to become the community that we are today.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what you look like, especially back then. Did not matter if you're Black, did not matter if you're white, did not matter if you're Democrat, Republican, Catholic, Presbyterian, whatever you wanted to be. Your neighbor was your neighbor, and everybody was taking care of everybody. And I think that that's what we can take away from this, is that no matter what happens, you got to watch out for your neighbor.
Yeah.
Be a kind person.
Right.
Do well and listen to the MEMA director when he tells you to evacuate.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Because, back then, even if you were a millionaire, you couldn't buy a bottle of water. Somebody had to give it to you. So
exactly. It humbled a lot of people, and it strengthened a lot of people. And we're, 20 years later, I think everybody who went through it can say that we're a little bit grateful for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Robert. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for watching live. Thank you for commenting. If you guys would like to follow us, you can follow us at Investigation Homicide. Nicole Crowell, Amanda Joe, Therese Apel. Follow 1, 2, 3, or 4 of us. Follow us on any platform. If you would like to download this podcast, we are on every platform that you can think of: Spotify, Apple Tunes, iTunes, whatever it's called. And y'all have a great Thursday. We'll see you again next week.